I suppose we could maybe talk about that at some point. I don't do any like talking with you about stuff really in this series. And maybe that's for the better. Who knows? That's your call. Uh, so welcome back. Thanks for bearing with the strange, unexpected postponement of last week. I'm hopeful that that event will actually happen. Um, that being said, on the conditions of how it happens, it's not going to happen on a Monday night when your class time is. So trying to negotiate it won't be a requirement from you, the students in plasma necessarily. But it was a missed opportunity to not get to hear from Carolina, uh, who couldn't perform work because of visa issues. Uh, she is Polish German, or a citizen of Germany, but of Polish descent. So still working that out. And her work is still work that I would suggest for you to take a look at. Otherwise, we are now in week 7 of plasma, almost spring break. We're moving along really quickly. So some default language here. Reminder that my name is Eli Vargas. This is the Plasma series, performance lectures and screenings by Media Arts, which is sponsored by the University at Buffalo, the Department of Media Study, our department. And funding is provided by the Office of the Dean and the College of the Arts and Sciences. As you all are learning, right, we're still learning about what exactly plasma is, what artist talks are, what screenings are, etc. It's a public speaker series that brings innovative and celebrated artists from a national and international context to the Buffalo area. It is also a course that exposes new and experimental forms of media arts to undergraduate students. So for the students, please take out your devices. You maybe are already ready for that. I would like you to write the word celluloid into week 7 sign-in beginning of class. And we'll close that in just 1 minute at 6:14. We'll close that. Being in the Department of Media Study, if you don't know what celluloid is, well, look it up. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not a good speller. I don't know if there's 1 or 2 L's. Okay, 2 L's, thank you. But you're not being graded on your spelling, so don't worry about that. I do want to say, and every plasma event, I mean to say this is for those of you who are joining via Zoom, watching remotely, and I apologize that I don't say it on the onset. I'm sorry we can't take your questions. You've probably figured that out at this point. If you are a returning attendee, if you are new, we won't be able to take your questions at the end. However, if you ask questions in chat, I'll make sure that questions get to Tomonari, but we can't take your question live during the Q&A. And like I say, I'm sorry for that, just the nature of the liveness of here. So I'm really excited about this evening and our speaker this week. Tomonari Nishikawa's films explore the idea of documenting a scene in the public space through a chosen medium and techniques. While his performances focus on the process of producing a visual and sound phenomenon using analog devices, his films have screened at film festivals worldwide, such as Berlinale, Hong Kong, New York, Rotterdam, and Toronto. And he performed at Block Museum, Chicago Film Society, Exploratorium, Microscope Gallery, Nanahari, among others. Nishikawa is also an active film curator, and he founded SEFF Binghamton and co-founded KLEX, Kuala Lumpur Experimental Film, Video and Music Festival, and Transient Visions. Nishikawa currently teaches in the cinema department at Binghamton University. I really hope that you enjoy this opportunity to see some films on 16 millimeter, and you really think deeply about the media specificity of the way in which Tomonari is working, and enjoy the opportunity to have this kind of medium experience. For those of you who are not accustomed to seeing 16 millimeter films, please help me welcome Tomonari.
Well, thank you so much, Elia. And I would like to thank Laura Craning and also Carly for inviting me for this opportunity too. And thank you so much for coming too. Yeah, today I made this theme, repetition, variation, rhythm, and structure for this talk. And I'm planning to show you 6 short films, but also I'm going to talk about the process and some ideas that I had when I was working on each of them. The first, maybe I would like to talk about myself. And first, I studied photography at Mohawk Valley Community College is in Utica, New York, where I studied mostly darkroom alternative techniques. So I was very familiar with celluloid medium. Then I transferred to Binghamton University, where I teach now. The department focuses on experimental and personal filmmaking, non-commercial movie making. So that's when I learned about filmmaking and video making. Then I went to San Francisco Art Institute and pursued MFA in filmmaking. At that time, I started making installation, but also film projection performance pieces. So I want to show you the list of films that I'm going to show you. The 60mm films, as Elia mentioned, we are going to watch from the original 60mm format, but one on Super 8 and 35mm film that I'm going to show you from digital copies. But first, I would like to talk about Goodnight Moon. So when Elia invited me to this talk, and he also asked me to provide him with some writing materials or the articles for his students to read. So most of you, I believe you read this. And also those who are not in his class, probably you have read this children's book. I did not know about this book when I was in Japan. But when I had the first kid and when she was maybe even 1, 2, 3, so I found this book at the local library. And well, the cover image was interesting, but also I read it and I found it very interesting. But I was not sure if kid would love this. Then I found out it was like a bestseller. So I was amazed, wow, like many kids, they love this book. So I'm not like talking about why I now think kids will love this children's book, but it's more about formal elements in this book because it's not the inspiration or this book didn't influence the way I do work on my project, but I found there are some ideas I found also in my project. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the formal elements. So first is about repetition and variations. And those who read certain words, but also images, will come back to the pages again and again. So basically, this book mentioned each like subject or object in this room. Then it started saying good night to each of them. So it's very simple. But this idea of repetition is already there. The use of words, but also the images. A rhythm, of course, from certain words, but also the way the images are spread onto the book, which is really interesting. So these are first 2 pages, but starting from here, you would see kind of like alternation between black and white and color, but also close-up images to like long shots. Like these are close-up, then kind of long shot showing entire room, then close-up in black and white and long shot. So the structure is not only about the plot, but also the author was really careful about how to present some of these ideas. And I found it's very interesting. And talking about the structure, because of the books has like 2 pages you can look at once. So this idea of like color for the entire room, well, not the entire room, but the mostly you can see the space. But then the next page, you would see only very small part of the room, focusing on certain subject. I found this very interesting. But also, you would see the moon appears behind the window and the moon is slowly rising. So this idea of time passing is there, but also each of these small like animals, they do change its positions. So ideas or maybe a gradual change that you will see here too. Yeah, I can point out very small things because it's really interesting. And also about the structure, the beginning, I'm going to go back to the first page, but this page doesn't show the other side of the room. So this is the first image now showing the other side of the room. And the old lady bunny was not there. So that's the beginning. And at the very end, she's also gone. So assuming that's now the young bunny is sleeping, but this idea of so there's a noise and she comes in and she's whispering hush. So that's the beginning. But at the end, it's not really the end of the plot to me, but the image it shows now saying that the good night noise is everywhere, but also the old lady is gone. So it's very interesting way to end this plot or the pictures children's book. So, and you will see some of these ideas in my film. And again, yeah, of course, I was not thinking of Goodnight Moon when I was working on like this project. And the first project I want to show you is in Super 8. It's called Manhattan 1234. There's an organization, it's called the Echo Park Film Center in LA, which was closed a few years ago. But when they are celebrating 12th anniversary, they commissioned some Super 8 filmmakers to make one cartridge film project, non-edited. I believe I shot one roll and sent it to Echo Park Film Center. They processed. So that's how the film would be completed. Then before working on this project, I had some ideas because at the time I was working on some other Super 8 project. And the idea I had was, it's really formal because I want to have like a certain lines appears on the screen. So, but I was not sure how I was going to, which I'm going to explain. But first, I want to show you, like Super 8 camera is so small and lightweight, but also it has an inbuilt light meter, which is great because you don't need to do light metering. You can just point and shoot. But also the camera I had has this feature. It's called the single frame, which means you can expose frame by frame, frame at a time, similar to how a still camera can take a picture. And the another image of the Super 8 cartridge It has 50-foot roll of Super 8 film. And I chose black and white. So idea was vague, but I want to have like something that's it's more about the rhythm, but also repetition, but also gradual change to end the film. But I was not sure how. I was visiting a Japanese filmmaker. His name is Takahiko Imura. He had a room in New York, Manhattan, and I arrived in New York much earlier. So I had about 4 hours to work on this project. So that's when I worked on this project. So diagram, if I can call this diagram, I made was, so I have these like 8 kind of like sequences and going from 1 and going to 8 and coming back to 1. What it shows is the camera movement, but also how I would find the lines as a subject. So first, I had the vertical camera movement for the shot 1, 2, 3. Then the fourth shot, I had a stationary shot. Then move on to the next one. So now I do have horizontal movement from left to right. So while I was filming, even though just one frame, I was moving camera, so image would become kind of blur, showing or emphasizing these horizontal lines. Then the fourth shot of that part would be stationary. I'm not sure if it makes sense, but so this is how I made. So you can see like a 3 frames has more like blur images, but the fourth image is more stationary. So again, it's more about the structure, but focusing on lines, but also more about the rhythm, because even though like when you project this at 24 frames per second, like every single stationary image would appear only just 1 frame and disappears, but still it would produce certain rhythm. And also we would see the lines would be changing its directions. Okay, I'm going to show this. Yeah, but I actually wish I could. So I want to talk about like this idea of gradual change. So idea was I started filming like a facade of the buildings and just focusing on the lines on the windows. But then I started including the top of the buildings. But then I started moving down to the street level. And I'm not sure if it appeared well, but then it was getting dark. So you could see like a strap front having lights, but also cars headlights that we could see. But the appointment with Taka Imura was at 6 p.m. So it was not like dark enough. But like original idea was I want to show kind of like a gradual change of the brightness at the scene. The next project is going to be projected from 60mm film projector. It's called Tokyo Ebisu. The Yamanote line is one of the busiest lines in Japan, and it runs as a loop. And I used to live in Tokyo before coming to the US, but also I usually go back to Japan and I stayed in Tokyo, and I often use this JL Yamanote line. And I wanted to make something about this whole like kind of phenomenon because the train comes and leaves every 3, 4, 5 minutes, and also train stopped at exactly the same position at the platform, so people know where the doors of the car would be. So people would line up. A few minutes, train comes, and people comes out from the train, and they are coming in, getting onto the train. So this idea of repetition was there too. But also, since the line runs in a loop, so this idea of repetition would be more. And of course, the idea of variation is there too. So, and also I was interested in how it could be like a meticulous way to operate the train because you need to be on time and you need to stop at a certain point at each station. So I want to not like doing the same way, but I want to do something similar to. I need to work on certain schedule, and also I need to repeat certain things again and again. So, and I decided to use, it's called masking or matting techniques. So film, the medium is interesting because you can expose only part of the frame, then you can rewind, or you can expose other part later. And idea would be different because video camcorder, you can also use mask to cover a certain part, but the video camcorder would record the black or the shadow on the frame. But the film would be unexposed, which means you can expose. So I made a set of two like masks, and one has a horizontal opening and another has a vertical openings. And combining these two on a matte box, I can expose only like one small rectangle on the frame. So this is a still from Tokyo Ebisu, and I kind of like divide it into 30 pieces. And I expose from the first to the 30th at each train station. So I mentioned that I need to be on schedule because the Yamanote line doesn't run 24/7. It starts running around 4:45 in the morning and it stops running around 1:45 a.m. And since I need to expose 30 times at each station, I knew it's gonna take about 75 to 90 minutes. Each shot, the length was determined by the duration of the camera that can run with a spring motor, which is actually 28 seconds. But I need to be always careful because I need to rewind at the point where I had exposure for previous one. Then I need to close the shutters, so it will take time. So it takes about like 75 to 80 minutes. Then I need to take a train and move to the next station. So that's the idea. I'm going to show you now, but I didn't film the entire 29 station. The original idea was I want to start from Tokyo Station and coming back to film again at Tokyo Station. So including Tokyo stations twice, meaning 30 stations I want to film. But at Shibuya Station, train station manager came up to me and he told me that I was not allowed to use a tripod on the platform. Even though I talked to JR line PR manager and he told me I could do it because I was not working for a TV production and I would be just alone with a tripod. He said, you would be fine, but no. So I need to stop the station before Shibuya Station, which was Ebisu Station. And that's why it's called Tokyo Ebisu. And I shot 10 station platforms. Okay, Carl, thanks. So for the sound for this Tokyo Ebisu, I recorded sound at each train station, not on the same day, but I came back about like a week later and using cassette tapes to record 30 times and I layered the sound. So that's why sound is not clear. The next project is Lumpini 2552. I had opportunity to live in Thailand for 6 months and I didn't have a movie camera. I didn't bring, but I had a still camera. And the university I was kind of associated with or was a researcher, it was called Chulalongkorn University, and they had a dark room. And they gave me permission to access their dark room. So, and I knew that 35 millimeters film for still photo could be projected through 35 millimeter movie projector. So that's I knew it. So I started working on this project at the Lumpini Park. So idea was very simple again. I purchased about 60 rolls of 36 exposure black and white the film. And I exposed each roll and I processed by myself and I spliced them together. But the one thing that I knew, but also I want to mention was, if you use a normal still camera, then one picture would be like that size on the left. But the gate at a 35 millimeter film projector, they would show like each frame at half of the size of the full like frame for still camera. So I found it's interesting because it's not only still camera was designed to make a movie, but also like each like picture would be split into like 2 frames. And since I decided to shoot like plants, leaves, and mostly as a close-up, so there are very similar patterns. So these 2 frames would be more like connected. And also this idea of 36 exposure cartridge, which means it's going to be 72 frames in a movie format, and 72 frames is going to be like a 3 seconds. So each cartridge would be more like a 3 second like a sequence in the 35 millimeter movie format. So the subject, I decided to shoot the plants, but there are some ideas maybe I can tell you. I'm not a Buddhist, but Lumpini is the birthplace of Buddha. But I knew some of the like teachings by Buddha because I'm Japanese. And one of them would be like this idea of like a middle way. And middle way, simply you don't want to take any extremes, but somewhere between. And I kind of focused on like these leaves, the plants showing more like horizontal lines, like these 2 pictures, or something more like a vertical. And then I kind of like alternated, but also gradual change to something more towards not really horizontal or vertical lines, but it's more about like shapes. And so it's very simple idea, and it's a very short film. And I also want to mention that since still camera would use entire frame, including the area which is called optical soundtrack. So any visual information on that area could be the sound when you project it through a movie projector. So it would have some noises, and noises are produced from the visual information on the optical soundtrack. Next film is also on 35. It's called the 1618 Fall. And I worked on this project at the Tokyo Racecourse. The project started when I found this strange toy camera at a second-hand store in my hometown in Aichi Prefecture. It's called Lancia Cardia Bune 16. And it has 16 lenses, and it takes a 35 millimeter film cartridge. And what it does is, so it takes 16 images, but not at once, but one at a time for about like 2 seconds. So you could take almost like a movie camera, like 16 frames in 2 seconds. And I found it's really interesting. And originally it was made for people who wants to check their like golf swinging forms, like it shows. And of course, I was thinking of some of you are familiar with this, like early experiment by Edward Muybridge. Then yes, I want to shoot maybe like a horses at the race course. But this camera, it has a wide angle lens, and there's no way I can change the aperture or anything. So it didn't work. That's I found out immediately. So instead, I decided to film like people's activities. One day when Tokyo Race Course was having the biggest race there. So image will look like this, like using 2 full frames and like vertical. Well, I could change the orientation, but having 16 images like this. And again, because the movie projector would project only half of full frame, so each frame would be like this, like 4 small images for each frame. And also I want to mention that this camera leaves certain area unexposed, so I could not get the image for the optical soundtrack, which I didn't know, but I found also it's interesting. So it's silent and about 2.5 minutes. I didn't expect such like a jumping effect. I couldn't tell when I was looking at the film. And when I worked on a 35 millimeter project, because I do not have a 35 millimeter viewers or projector. So all I did was just looking at the image, and according to the image, I spliced it together. I also want to mention that so this camera, toy camera, was of course not designed to make a movie, but I found it's very interesting how these, especially toy camera, how it would produce something that's kind of like unexpected and surprising. And those who are familiar with film projection, when something goes wrong, film start jumping. So this jumping effect is actually most filmmakers are familiar with, but it's not like because of something is going wrong, but that's because of the format. And I found it interesting. So two more projects, and both of them are on 16. And the first one is 10 mornings, 10 evenings, and 1 horizon. So this is a map of Aichi Prefecture and Nagano Prefecture. There's a line in blue, that's the Yahagi River. I think it was the summer of 2016 when I found that my father's birthplace, which is in Hiraya village, with the yellow like dots at the top. And where I was growing up was one yellow dot at the bottom. So it's interesting how like a river was connecting these two places. Even though my father went Nagoya and some other place, then we found Okazaki to raise his kids. But I found that this connection was really interesting. So I wondered if I could work on this project. And I started checking, of course, Google Maps, and then the river could be a metaphor of a life. Then what about like bridges? And I started checking like bridges, and there are about 65 to 70 bridges. And I checked each of them, the first with Google Street View. Then I actually visited and found which one I could actually place a tripod to shoot the bridge. So my interest or idea shifted from the river to bridge. Then I decided to use multiple exposure techniques, the ones I use for Tokyo Ebisu, but in a different way. And I'm going to explain this. So I'm going to just show you, I chose 10 bridges. And also I decided to choose the ones, it runs from the east to west. And I decided to film each bridge when the sun was rising from the east side and when the sun was setting from the west side. And this is a setup. In front of the camera, I had the masks covering most of the part, but one vertical openings to expose the part of the frame for each shot. And those who are familiar with like contact printing in photography, when you try to find a good exposure, you do make a contact print and changing an exposure and see which exposure would be the best to make a print. So it's really similar the way. And I kind of connected these two, but one shot with the, in the morning. So I was on, I think I was on maybe the west side. Sorry, but what I did was I was with the light meter, and purposely for the first one, on the very left one, was 2 stops underexposed. So I was waiting, not like changing the aperture size, but waiting because the sun was rising. Then when the light meter shows like half a stop or almost like a half a stop brighter than the one I shot, then I shot for the second exposure. So it gradually getting brighter from left to right. And when the sun was setting, I did the opposite. So this idea would not maybe connect this shot, but since the subject is the same, but the viewpoint is different, but also I try to have this idea like rising, but also going down or the falling. And I decided to use this multiple exposure technique. Okay, Carl. I want to mention that I was wrong. The morning shot I shot from the east side of the bridge. Okay, the last one, it's called amusement ride. So this is where I worked on this project. It's a face reel. It's called Cosmo Clock 21. And again, I was not sure if I was going to work on a project, but I knew this Ferris wheel is interesting because not only it has a clock, but it has 60 cars. And it actually takes about 15 minutes wait, 15 minutes? No, that's 15 minutes. I'm sorry, I forgot about how long it's gonna take. But I think it really represents like a clock. And first time I rode on this Ferris wheel, I had my DSLR and see if I could find any interesting like landscape or architecture. So I was not sure what I was going to work on this, but I knew this like a gradual, elevation or the movement would make something interesting. But then I found it would be more interesting to shoot the structure of the Ferris wheel itself. So before showing the image from the still with the film, I want to explain how the movie projector would work. I mean, the film projector would work. So there's a film strip which runs through the projector, but it's not always running at the same speed. I mean, it's not running continuously at the gate because when the image would be projected, the film strip must be stationary so that we can see each image of the frame stationary. Otherwise, you would see only like a vertical, like a blur image. So the motion is really like an intermittent, like stop and go and stop and go, and it happens 24 times per second. So when I was riding on a Ferris wheel, like a cabin, because I was alone, and also because of the wind, the cabin was swinging, and this gradual like rotation while moving upwards and downwards, it would produce a very interesting effect. Sometimes the view using this telephoto lens, it looks like almost like it's not like moving. That's because of the movement of the rotation of the Ferris wheel, but also the swing of the cabins would make it as if it was not moving. But also telephoto lens would separate the foreground and the background. So you would see kind of like separation, how the structure of the Ferris wheel is moving, but also background is also moving, but at a different speed. It's about 6 minutes.
ブロック21は、高さ112.5メートル、8人乗りのゴンドラが無重量のみ、 最大480人までご乗車いただけ、およそ15分で一周いたします。また、世界最大の時計機能付き大観覧車としてギネスブックに認定されており、中心には縦4メートル、横16メートルのBoeing Square Yokohama and sail training ship Tomonari. On a clear day, you can also enjoy a splendid view of Mount Fuji that appears between Yokohama Landmark Tower and Queen's Square, Yokohama. 皆様の北側には、ヨットの方をイメージした外観が印象的な横浜グラフィック横浜国内ワールドでは、
There are 12 shots in this amusement ride. And because I wanted to keep this vertical movement from the top to the bottom, like the way film strips runs at the gate of the film projector. So from the sixth to the last shot, I put camera upside down to keep this the same motion on the screen. And yeah, that's it. But I would like to mention another things. So often when we watch a movie, of course, we do watch the contents and we don't think much about like devices the artist or filmmaker use. Like when we look at the painting, we don't talk about what kind of brush the artist used. But as a maker, tools or devices are really important. And I tend to work with this kind of like limits, what the film camera would give me or what the film projector would give us. Like these 360mm films, Tokyo Abyss, 10 Mornings, and also Amusement Ride, each shot was almost exactly 28 seconds. That the longest duration I could get with my camera with a spring motor. And so something like this, I kind of like to embrace, but also at the same time, I'm kind of like giving up like the ways to edit the film too. But I enjoyed these ways to make or edit the film. And thank you.
All right, everyone, you know how this goes. That was a real treat to get inside the process of those films as well. So I hope you have some questions. Please raise your hands.
Great work. Throughout your presentation, you had a lot of diagrams, and it seems like all of your experiments are well thought out. And I was kind of left with this question of, would you start a project and get a different result? Would you start something and something unexpected would happen? You've kind of hinted at it when talking about amusement when you were on the Ferris wheel, and the swaying effect was something you didn't have planned out. So I was hoping you could talk more about this sort of process of planning out experiments and the results that come out of it.
Sure. Often the idea is very simple, and I usually try, could be like just visit the site and shoot one roll and see how it will look like. And often my projects like fails at the early stage because the result was not like what I wanted, even though I couldn't picture what kind of image I would get. Like again, like amusement ride, I had a totally different idea. But then I found this image would be very interesting with the telephoto lens, and particularly in this, the composition to work on. And so sometimes it's more like findings when I started working on the project, but other times I couldn't find a way to work with the original idea, even though I tried to modify, but then simply I give up, so project simply fails. So it happens often too. So there are many projects, like failed projects I do have.
One of the things that I really liked about your work is that you give the audience a view into Japan and everyday Japanese, whether it's architecture or trains or maps or roads. And as somebody who has had a very big admiration for Japan and the Japanese mindset, I really like seeing that. It's weird, but I like it. So I kind of have two questions. I hope that's okay. Number one, um, are you doing that deliberately? Is it more of like a pride, like, Japanese pride? Which if it is, I think that's great. Or is it just happen to be that you focus on Japan by coincidence? And my second question is, what is it that you would like your audience to come away with when they watch your work?
Thank you. So the first question, it doesn't need to be in Japan, but usually I do work on my project during the summer, and that's when I usually visit Japan. So that's why most of the project I made was actually in Japan. But I think it's interesting because I'm more interested in like observing or documenting the scenes, not like controlling or directing, but just simply recording landscape or people's activities. So it's more like an everyday life, as you said. So that's I try to capture and depict in a way. The second question, I'm not sure how I can answer because I would say all of my films, there's no like certain plot or like a story as a structure. And structure is very different from like a narrative structure. But I try to have like certain structure, similar to maybe more like a music composition. So audience of a music piece would probably sense how, kind of like a follow how it changes, but also expect how or when it's gonna end, even though it's not clear. So my film maybe works in a similar way, but I'm not sure. Amusement ride, which actually suggests more about like ending, because I had a tripod with a camera pointing at a certain direction, and at the beginning it shows only the colors of the cabin next to mine. And the ending was also, but also it's gradually going up. We saw like a skyscrapers at the top of buildings, then going down. So it's almost like suggesting how it's gonna end. And the phase 3 ride is gonna end when you come back to the ground. So such kind of like a suggesting, not like as a like a story, but there's a structure, and I'm interested in structure. So I try to start in a certain way, but I also change to end in a certain way. Again, I'm not sure if audience would sense this, but that's maybe one thing I do think when I was working on like editing or when I make a structure of the film.
First off, thank you for being here. Second, and I hope I'm not reading into the films too much, but as a viewer, the first thing I notice is the lines. And you've mentioned that a little bit in your first film, but I was curious about if you could speak a little bit more about how lines sort of inform your process. Do you notice them when you're just scouting, and then does that inform later the images that might be in a film or something along those lines? No pun intended.
Thank you. Yes, the first film, that's Manhattan 1, 2, 3, 4. That's really about lines. Then I'm thinking like a Tokyo Ebisu, but also amusement ride and like 10 mornings, there are lines. And the lines, sometimes because of the process, like multiple exposure with mattings. So you see almost like a grids or these lines in 10 mornings. That's about like process. And I'm not trying to hide the process or techniques that I use. And as a result, these lines would appear. So that's, I feel like that's totally fine. And talking about maybe 10 mornings, I was thinking of horizontal lines as a bridge because bridge usually runs like horizontally, but also bridge has supports and supports has like a vertical lines. So these vertical divisions would also kind of like work well with the subject bridge. And so the first bridge was actually the first bridge of this Yahagi River was very short. And I don't remember how many like supports it had, but the last bridge is much longer. And there are like many supports. And these like lines, result of multiple exposure, almost aligned the bridge supports. So this is not the reason why I decided to use this particular techniques, but I was aware of this. So it's not really answering the question, but I'm not sure why has so many lines appears in my films. But yeah, I don't know. But yes, I agree. There are many lines in my films.
Hello. Thank you again. I also very much enjoyed this presentation. So something I was wondering, I noticed many of these different shorts are all filmed in very different locations, and a lot of them have a different sort of emotional resonance to them. The Manhattan one kind of comes off across as flashy and overwhelming and in your face. I felt a similar thing about the Shibuya short with the crowds layered on crowds with all those camera techniques. So I was kind of wondering, when you're planning a project and you're first starting it out, do you bear with me while I think of how to phrase this better. Do you start with an idea of a recording technique and a landscape composition that you'd like to capture and show it to everyone and let them feel how they feel about it? Or do you more have a certain emotion related to the area you're filming in that you figure out how to best express in your recording?
I see. Thank you. Maybe not like emotions or feelings, but it's more about like an environment, including sound. Like for example, Tokyo Ebisu, the one I shot on the train platforms. Like when you are there are so many lines at each stations, even though the film shows only like one view. but there are other trains running behind you, but there are more. So these techniques may almost like not like represent how you would feel, but it's almost like emphasize how you would feel. So that kind of feelings, yes, I would probably consider, and 10 mornings too, but it's more about like a natural phenomenon. Like the first few shots, sound of like river streams are so loud, but then when the river runs through like city area, then we don't hear the sound of the river anymore. But then we will notice the sound of birds chirping or sound from the vehicles, street noises. So that's again more about the environment, but not like how I would feel at the site. But I try to capture both for most of the project. Like amusement ride too, I recorded when I was riding, but I rode, I think 11 or 12 times. So sometimes if I was lucky, the cabin has this like a speaker, so it's working, so I could hear like announcement. But often there's no sound because speaker was broken, I believe. So and that kind of experience I had, I try to put here too. So again, it's not maybe the main like focus, but I try to like my own experience, but also with image and sound to not really how I experienced, but still like the essence of how I experienced. Thank you.
I know I saw some other hands over there, and so while they're formulating or deciding not to ask their questions, I'm going to ask you a question.
Sure.
I want to go back to the very, very beginning of the presentation when you were talking about Goodnight Moon. I love that formal analysis of it. That was really quite lovely, and I think about that book a lot these days for similar reasons to the way you were describing. And so I want to, formally it's very rich, but it's also about the moon, this reflective beaming surface. And as many other media artists have pontificated about, in fact, explored the structural relationship of signal off the moon, I wanted to ask you a little bit, if you could speak a little bit more to your relationship of this kind of projector in the sky, but also just point out how playful I felt like it is for you to start out by talking about Goodnight Moon, and also if you could speak a little bit to the play involved in this process.
Sure. I'm not sure if I can like answer the way you may want to hear, but I can probably point out. So Goodnight Moon, again, like it's really interesting how the image of the room gets darker and darker, then moon is rising. When it gets very dark, then we notice that not only the entire room was getting darker, but also brightness from the lamp was also getting darker. But then we noticed that there's like a small toy house was also has a light inside, which was not so visible. But later on, because now the room is so dark, so then these lights from inside the toy house was so visible. So these small things, even though we couldn't fully notice when we are looking at like single page, but going on through the children's book, then we would notice these gradual change, but also like a small change. So that's like change of the exposure would be one thing. And the amusement ride, even though it's not maybe a noticeable, but so I rode maybe 11 or 12 times. And we started riding around noon, but last ride was already, like 5 in the evening. So it gets slightly darker. So this idea from riding on the Ferris wheel and going up, then exposure was purposely slightly overexposed. Then when you are getting back, then exposure was again purposely underexposed. So these change it's not really the big part of the project, but I try to kind of play this idea going up and going down, but also the situation when it was, of course, getting dark because it was in the evening, but I could easily adjust the exposure to make it almost like constant and the same, but I try to kind of reflect what not only the environment, but also this like a movement from going up and going down, so getting brighter and getting darker. I'm not sure if this is playful, but that's I was thinking.
It's so wonderful to see your films again and to have you describe and show diagrams of how they're made, because some of them I didn't know some of those specifics. And so I was thinking of two things. One, which you haven't really discussed directly, is the experience of time. So, the 10 Mornings film, you're creating slices of time. And so we're experiencing space, but we're also experiencing time. And so that's something, that is throughout your works. But I was wondering about, you have this very, playful but rigid structure that you create, but there's an element of chance that you're open up to. And so I'm wondering if maybe you could speak a little bit about the pleasure of that chance. I mean, there's some humor where, like, I don't know about others, but, when we see the man jogging and we see him further along before because of when you were filming each slice, or, seeing the cars, how they disappear, and those kind of revelations, are those like, I imagine those being really exciting for you when you see that happening. So wondering if you could talk a little bit about
Sure.
the element of chance
Sure.
and how you may embrace that.
Sure. So first about the time, like Lumpini 2022, but also 1618 fall, that's I use like a 35 still camera. So it's basically taking still picture. So time, these two projects, but also some other project I use a single frame would produce, it's more about really similar to like a stop motion animation. Like it does not produce the sense of time where I shot these images because of like still pictures. But the others, but also like Tokyo Ebisu and 10 Mornings because of multiple exposure. So time would be very different, even though camera is stationary and showing the same scene, but the time, each like grids or vertical parts has different time. So that's was something that I wanted to play with this idea of time changing too. So I was not successful to move on to like beyond ABC station. But the original idea was, of course, I wanted to shoot until like last train was running around like 1:45 a.m. So one shot, not this project, but I actually continued to work on this project. It's called Shibuya Tokyo. One shot was showing one part was correct exposure, but getting dark within the shot. So then audience would be more aware, not could be like a changing the aperture size, but if I change the aperture size, then grid would look or appear in a different way because of the depth of field will change. So I was really aware of this, like how these would affect the image, but also multi-exposure is always interesting, especially using these like masking techniques because, okay, Tokyo ABC is just 5 minutes, but I shot 30 times, so which means we actually watched 150 minutes footage, but we just spent 5 minutes to watch. And we can't watch everything, but we experienced 150 minutes footage in 5 minutes. So that's also an interesting way to think of time to me. So this like surprises, there are many, but sometimes I try to do, but then I do fail. like that's the person who was jogging was very interesting. So I already had the position to film that bridge because after checking Google Street View, I actually visited these bridges and decided where the tripod would be. But when I checked, he was not, of course, jogging. But early in the morning, he was jogging and he saw me setting a tripod. He asked me if he was okay to jog. And I said, of course. And I told him I was filming the bridge, but he was part of my film and he was not sure, but he was jogging all the way when I was there, spending about like 30, 40 minutes. So that's a good surprise. But then one shot in the evening, because I knew there would be almost like a full moon, and I wanted to have the moon at on two like panels. So I was waiting, but I already had a rule. So when the exposure changes, like half a stop, I need to film. So I couldn't do quite well. So this attempt kind of like failed because I couldn't do the way I wanted to. But there's always kind of like something that I tried to, but it didn't work well. But also something that I didn't quite expect, but it happened, and that would give a happy result. And this idea of chance is really big because when I decided to film for 28 seconds, I couldn't control anything in front of the lens. So I just let it happen and the camera would just capture the scene.
Funny that you mentioned about the moon there, because then that ties back to the book, and as
Yeah.
things are getting darker, it's very related to the time and
Mhm.
I think this will be our last question.
Thank you again. I really respect your emphasis on like the equipment used in each of your works, but I'm curious, what is more important? Communicating the process of each film through the film itself or the resulting image? Because I guess in like a few of these, you could have easily like slowed the images down or sped them up so that the audience could like pay attention to the details or maybe understand the film or its process better. But I guess it's also possible that you're also kind of exploring how uncontrollable time can be.
Mhm. Thank you. That's maybe difficult to answer. I think the process is very important. Often process is also part of the concept. Um, and of course, the result that's sometimes does not show the process, but as a maker, like how I made it is still important. So I'm actually don't know how I can answer the question, but to the audience, it's really for them to interpret or to see the film. Again, there's no story, and also like Goodnight Moon. When I first read, I didn't notice many things because I read it so many times to my kid. So I noticed, but also my kid noticed small things. So there's kind of these surprises. And with this multiple exposure piece, especially Tokyo Ebisu, there's no way we could look at every single like small screen within screen. So it would maybe require like multiple viewing. So then audience would know more about what's actually going on. And that's actually true to like many movies too, even though like many conventional narrative movies, once you watch it and understood the story, then you feel like you understood. But of course, there are many other things that you can look at too. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know how to answer the question.
I suppose we'll have to end with a little bit of a mystery there.
Sorry.
I mean, I suppose open-ended questions are always really nice, and I guess I would say the relationship between the kind of poetics of time and the structural process that you're working with is, at the very least, it's been a real treat to listen to you discuss it this evening. So we're really grateful to you for that. And I particularly enjoy the kind of vagueness between those spaces in your work. So please, everyone, round of applause for Berlinale. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For the students, your sign out is open. The word is good night moon. Once you've written it in, you may leave. Have a great night. See you next week.
Thank you.